The baby didn't cry when she was born. In a small hospital in Charleston, South Carolina, nurses exchanged uneasy glances as they waited for the newborn's first breath. Most babies entered the world wailing, desperate for air, but this one, she simply opened her eyes and stared. The sterile glow of the overhead lights reflected in her irises, large, dark, and unsettlingly focused. Her tiny chest rose and fell in steady, controlled movements, as if she wasn't gasping for life but rather assessing her surroundings. The doctor frowned but quickly masked his concern with a reassuring smile. "She's perfectly healthy," he told the mother, though his voice carried an edge of hesitation. Hannah Dalton, exhausted and drenched in sweat, reached out for her daughter. "Then why isn't she crying?" The doctor hesitated. "Some babies don't. She's breathing fine, her heartbeat's strong." He gently laid the baby in her mother's arms. "She's just calm." But as Hannah looked into her newborn's deep, unwavering stare, she felt an unsettling sensation curl at the base of her spine. It was like the baby was looking through her, past her, like she recognized her, like she had been here before. And then the newborn did something that made Hannah's breath hitch. She sighed. Not a sleepy, involuntary exhale. No, it was something different, something deliberate, like recognition. Hannah and her husband David named their daughter Eliza. At first, they convinced themselves that the strange birth had been a fluke. But then Eliza grew older. By the time she was 2, she was already speaking in full sentences. Not just the usual "I want milk" or "read me a story." Her words carried intent. One evening, while Hannah rocked her in a chair, Eliza reached up, her tiny fingers brushing against her mother's cheek. "You look different," she murmured sleepily. Hannah blinked. "Different how, baby?" Eliza frowned, as if trying to find the words. "You had longer hair before." Hannah's stomach twisted. "Before what?" she asked softly. But Eliza's little mouth snapped shut. She wouldn't say another word. By age 4, Eliza knew things she shouldn't. It started small. She would hum classical music, Beethoven, Debussy, Chopin, before she had ever heard it. She could describe places they had never taken her, like the boardwalk in San Diego or the apple orchards in Vermont. But then, one evening, something happened that Hannah would never forget. She had been cooking dinner when she heard Eliza singing in the living room. It wasn't a nursery rhyme. It was a love song. The melody was soft, haunting, a wedding song. Hannah stepped into the doorway. "Sweetheart, where did you hear that?" Eliza, now sitting cross-legged on the carpet, looked up with a small, knowing smile. "It was supposed to play at my wedding." Hannah's grip on the doorframe tightened. She forced a laugh. "Your wedding? You're not even 5, silly girl." But Eliza's expression didn't change. "I was going to get married," she said. "Before I died?" A cold shiver ran down Hannah's spine. "What do you mean, baby?" Eliza's tiny hands curled into the fabric of her dress. For the first time, she hesitated. "I don't remember," she murmured, suddenly unsure. But Hannah could tell. That was a lie. Eliza did remember. She just wasn't ready to say how. The years passed, but the feeling that something was wrong never faded. Eliza's memories came in flashes. At 6 years old, she recognized a stranger on TV, an old jazz musician from Chicago, long dead, whom she could name instantly. At 8, she drew buildings from places she had never visited, the San Francisco skyline down to the smallest rooftop details. At 10, she knew how to tie a tie perfectly, a skill her father had never taught her. And at 16, she dreamed about him, the man she was supposed to marry. His name came to her in a rush, like a forgotten melody returning after years of silence. Daniel. She saw him in fragments. The curve of his jaw, the way his dimples showed when he laughed, the scar on his left hand from a childhood accident. She felt his lips on her forehead, the warmth of his hand in hers. She felt the weight of an engagement ring on her finger. But the dreams always ended the same way. With pain, with a bright light, with shouting, with the feeling of falling forever. She would wake up gasping, clutching her sheets, tears streaming down her face. But she never remembered how it ended. What had happened? Why hadn't she married Daniel? What had ripped her away from that life? She needed to know. One night, long after her parents had gone to bed, Eliza sat at her desk, her fingers hovering over her laptop keyboard. Her hands trembled. She was being crazy. It had to be some kind of obsession, right? And yet, she typed, Daniel Carter. The search results loaded in seconds. Her breath hitched. There were hundreds of Daniel Carters in the US, but one name, one face made her heart stop. The same blue eyes, the same jawline. Older now, of course. But it was him, and he was still alive. Her stomach twisted in anticipation, her pulse hammering. She clicked on his social media profile. Her heart dropped. Daniel Carter wasn't waiting for her. He wasn't still mourning her absence. He was married to someone else, a beautiful blonde woman. Their wedding photos were everywhere, full of smiles, full of love, a perfect life. Eliza's fingers clenched into fists. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. Her dreams, her memories, they had been real. And if they were real, that meant something terrible had happened to her. And Daniel had moved on, but she hadn't. And now that she had found him, now that she knew, she wouldn't let him go. Not again. Eliza couldn't breathe. The images on the screen blurred as her heart pounded in her ears. Daniel Carter was real. She wasn't crazy. She wasn't imagining it. The man she had dreamed of for years, the man whose name had surfaced in her mind as naturally as her own. He existed. But he wasn't waiting for her. He had moved on. Eliza scrolled through his profile, her fingers trembling. The photos told the story of a life she wasn't part of. A wedding in a vineyard in Napa Valley, golden light spilling across Daniel's face as he stood beside his bride. A tall, beautiful woman with blonde curls and a perfect smile. Their honeymoon in Santorini, their arms wrapped around each other. The deep blue sea stretching endlessly behind them. Their first home, a charming suburban house with a white picket fence, decorated for Christmas. Their golden retriever sitting happily on the porch. Daniel Carter had a life, and she wasn't in it. Eliza's stomach twisted into a tight knot. It wasn't fair. She had waited. She had remembered. And yet, here he was, happy with someone else, as if she had never existed. Sleep didn't come that night. Eliza tossed and turned, her dreams a swirling mess of memories and nightmares. Flashes of Daniel's face, of his hands in hers, of a wedding dress she never got to wear. And then, a sharp pain, a bright light, screaming. She woke up gasping for air, her sheets damp with sweat. Something had happened to her, something violent, and if Daniel wouldn't come to her, then she would go to him. The next morning, Eliza skipped school. She had one goal, to contact him. She sat at her desk, staring at a blank email draft for nearly an hour. What could she say? Hey Daniel, you don't know me, but I know you. I remember our past life together. I remember our wedding that never happened. I remember dying. Number. He'd think she was insane. She deleted the draft and started again. Hi Daniel, I know this will sound strange, but I need to talk to you. It's about something important, something personal. I promise I'm not a scam or a stalker. Please just give me a chance to explain. She hesitated, then attached a photo, a sketch she had drawn from memory. It was Daniel, as he was before, a younger version of him the way she remembered in her dreams. She had sketched it weeks ago, never knowing she'd actually find him. Her finger hovered over the send button, and then she clicked it. Days passed. No response. Eliza checked her email obsessively, refreshing her inbox every 5 minutes. Nothing. Had he ignored it? Had it gone to spam? Had he read it and laughed, or Had something inside him stirred? Maybe he was afraid. Maybe he remembered too. On the fourth day, her phone buzzed. An unknown number. Her pulse skyrocketed. She hesitated only a second before answering. Hello? Silence. And then, a familiar voice. A voice from another life. Who are you? Daniel's voice was tight, wary. Eliza's breath caught in her throat. She gripped the phone tighter, her heart hammering. You know who I am, she whispered. A sharp inhale on the other end. How did you find me? Eliza swallowed hard. I just did, she said honestly. I remembered. Silence. Then, his voice, lower now, almost frightened. I don't know what kind of sick game you're playing, he said, but leave me alone. The line went dead. Eliza sat there, her hands shaking. He was lying. She could hear it in his voice. He knew. Somewhere deep inside he remembered too. And now, he was running from it. That night, Eliza's dreams were worse than ever. She was in a hotel room, staring at a wedding dress hanging in the corner. A man's voice was outside the door, Daniel's voice. He was talking to someone, but she couldn't hear the words. And then, a loud bang. Pain bloomed in her chest. Blood on white fabric. She fell. Fell forever. And then, darkness. She woke up screaming. Her parents burst into the room, panicked. Eliza, what's wrong? She couldn't answer. Because now she knew. She hadn't died in an accident. She had been murdered. And Daniel had been there. The next day, she bought a bus ticket to his city. Daniel Carter wasn't going to escape her, not again, not this time. The city was bigger than she expected. The bus ride had been long, the endless stretch of highways blurring together in her mind. She had barely slept, her body vibrating with nervous energy, replaying Daniel's voice in her head. Who are you? Leave me alone. He was afraid, which meant, somewhere deep inside he remembered too. Now, she stood on the sidewalk outside a coffee shop in Portland, Oregon, where she knew Daniel went every morning before work. She had seen it in his social media posts. Small details barely noticeable. The corner seat by the window, the same order every time. He was predictable, and today, he would see her. Eliza's hands trembled as she wrapped her fingers around her cup, watching the door. Minutes passed. Then, there he was. Her heart stopped. Daniel stepped inside, wearing a dark coat, his hair slightly tousled. He looked older than she remembered in her dreams, but it was still him. She barely noticed the woman at his side, his wife Lily. Eliza's nails dug into her palm. Lily, the woman who had taken her place. Daniel went to the counter, ordering their drinks. He laughed at something Lily said, his hand brushing against hers as they waited. Eliza felt something inside her snap. She should have been the one standing beside him. She should have been the one he loved. Her chest tightened. She reached for her phone, her thumb hovering over the photo she had sent him, the drawing of his younger face. Slowly, she typed, "Turn around." And then, she pressed send. Daniel's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out absent-mindedly, expecting an email or a text from work. But when he saw the message, a number he didn't recognize, his stomach dropped. The air in the cafe felt suddenly thick, suffocating. Lily noticed his expression. "What's wrong?" Daniel didn't answer. His hands felt numb as he turned his head, scanning the crowded cafe, and then he saw her, a girl sitting near the window staring at him. Her eyes were sharp, piercing. Daniel's throat tightened. It wasn't possible. She looked exactly like Emily. But Emily was dead. He felt his pulse quickening, a cold sweat breaking out across his skin. His mind screamed coincidence, hallucination, mistake. But deep down he knew something was wrong. Eliza watched as recognition dawned on his face. Daniel froze, his expression unreadable. "Good," He knew. Lily touched his arm, concerned. "Daniel?" He looked away, stuffing his phone into his pocket, shaking his head. "Let's go." They left in a hurry, stepping onto the street. But Eliza wasn't done. Not even close. She waited exactly 10 minutes before following them. She kept her distance. Daniel and Lily walked hand in hand, but she could tell he was shaken. He kept looking over his shoulder, his grip on Lily's hand too tight. They reached an apartment complex, disappearing inside. Eliza stood on the opposite sidewalk watching. Now she knew where he lived. A slow smile curled across her lips. She wasn't going anywhere. That night, Daniel dreamed of Emily. He hadn't dreamed of her in years, not like this. The hotel room was exactly as it had been that night. White curtains billowing against the open window. A wedding dress hanging in the corner untouched. Emily sat on the bed, brushing her fingers along the lace of the veil. And then, she turned to him. Her eyes were empty. "You left me," she whispered. Daniel jolted awake, heart pounding. The room was dark, Lily's breathing soft beside him. But something felt wrong. He sat up slowly. His mouth was dry. He reached for the glass of water on his nightstand. And then, his phone vibrated. He hesitated. Then, with trembling fingers, he lifted the screen. One message. No number. "I remember everything now." Daniel's blood ran cold. He turned his head toward the bedroom window. And there, in the darkened street below, a girl stood perfectly still, watching. His breath caught in his throat. The same sharp, piercing eyes. Daniel felt the familiar grip of terror wrapping around his ribs. Number. This wasn't real. Emily was dead. And yet, the girl outside smiled. And Daniel knew with a sickening certainty, she wasn't going to leave. Not this time. Not ever. Daniel couldn't breathe. His fingers tightened around his phone, his pulse hammering in his ears. From the second-floor window of his apartment, he could see her, standing on the sidewalk, staring up at him. The girl from the cafe. The girl who looked too much like Emily. She didn't move, didn't blink, just stood there, watching. A cold wave of dread crawled up Daniel's spine. This wasn't a coincidence. This was something else. Something wrong. Lily stirred beside him, her voice groggy. "Daniel? What's wrong?" He couldn't answer. His body felt frozen, locked in place by the horror that had settled deep in his bones. She was still there. A distant street lamp flickered above her head, casting eerie shadows across her face. For a second, Daniel thought, no, he was sure, that her lips moved, like she was whispering something. Then, the street lamp went out. Total darkness. Daniel's breath hitched. When the light flickered back on a second later, she was gone. He barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, the past bled into the present. Emily's face, her wedding dress hanging in the hotel room, her laughter, bright and careless. And then, blood. The memory slammed into him like a train. Emily's screams, the hotel door bursting open, the gunshot. Daniel sat up with a jolt, gasping for air. His chest ached, as if the bullet had torn through him instead. But that wasn't how it happened. That wasn't how she died. Was it? Morning came too soon. Daniel was exhausted, his skin clammy, his head pounding. Lily noticed. "You look like hell," she murmured, kissing his cheek. "Are you getting sick?" Daniel forced a weak smile. "Just didn't sleep well." Lily pulled on her coat. "I have a meeting downtown, but we can order in tonight, okay?" He nodded, distracted, his mind somewhere else. She hesitated at the door. "You sure you're okay?" Daniel swallowed. Should he tell her? Tell her that some random girl, no, not random, Emily, had been following him? That she had been watching him from the street at 3 a.m.? Lily would never believe him. Hell, he barely believed it himself. "Yeah," he said. "I'm fine. It was a lie. By afternoon, Daniel was losing it. Everywhere he went, he felt like he was being watched. At the office, in the parking garage, even in his own apartment. His phone buzzed, an unknown number. Daniel's stomach dropped. Slowly, he unlocked the screen. "Do you remember how I died?" Daniel's vision blurred, his lungs locked. "Number no, no, no." His hands shook as he typed. "Who is this?" 3 dots appeared, typing. Then, "You were there." Daniel's blood turned to ice. He dropped his phone like it burned him, his breath coming in short, sharp gasps. This wasn't happening. It wasn't possible. Emily was dead. But if she was, then who the hell was texting him? That night, Eliza dreamed again. She was in the hotel room, the same one from before. The scent of roses lingered in the air, her wedding bouquet. She stood before a mirror wearing the dress. The white lace hugged her frame, delicate and beautiful. Then, a knock at the door. She turned. "Daniel?" No answer. Another knock, louder this time. Her stomach twisted. Something wasn't right. She took a step forward, her fingers reaching for the door handle. Then, bang. Pain. White hot, burning through her chest. Her breath caught, gasping, choking. Her vision blurred, the walls spinning. She collapsed. And then, darkness. Eliza woke up sobbing. Her hand flew to her chest, feeling for the bullet hole that wasn't there. But the pain, it had felt real. She staggered out of bed, barely able to breathe. Her hands were shaking as she grabbed her phone. She typed, heart hammering. "I remember how I died." A long pause. Then, Daniel's response came. "I didn't kill you." Eliza's blood ran cold. She hadn't accused him, not yet. But now she knew. Daniel had been there, and he had lied. Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him, not just from a distance, inside his own home. Lily was in the kitchen, humming softly as she poured herself a cup of coffee. But Daniel sat frozen on the couch, his phone still in his hand, staring at the last message. "I remember how I died." His chest felt tight, his fingers dug into the armrest. Because the truth was, he didn't remember. Not completely. There were pieces, flashes of a hotel room, the scent of roses, a gunshot. But the details, the important details, were gone, buried beneath years of forgetting. Or maybe, suppressing. The sound of Lily's voice pulled him out of his thoughts. "You okay?" Daniel blinked. His mouth felt dry. "Yeah," he muttered. "Just tired." Lily sat beside him, running her fingers through his hair. "You've been weird lately." Weird. Right. He hadn't told her about the girl outside their apartment last night. Hadn't told her about the messages. Hadn't told her that when he closed his eyes, Emily's voice whispered his name. She leaned in and kissed his temple. "I'm here if you want to talk." Daniel forced a smile. "I know." He didn't. Because Lily wouldn't understand, and Emily wouldn't let him go. That night, he dreamed of her. The hotel room again. The wedding dress. The smell of flowers. Emily was there, sitting on the edge of the bed, her hands smoothing over white lace. She looked up at him. "You left me," she whispered. Daniel's breath hitched. "No, You forgot me." Her fingers tightened around the fabric, twisting the delicate material between her knuckles. "You promised," she said. Daniel felt paralyzed. He wanted to run, to wake up, but his body wouldn't move. Emily stood. The dress trailed behind her, longer than it should have been, the edges dragging across the floor like something rotting, decayed. "You belonged to me." The room tilted, the walls stretching unnaturally, and Daniel's vision blurred. "Emily," he choked out. She reached for him, and when her fingers brushed against his skin, ice. His body jerked violently awake. His chest heaved, his skin damp with sweat. The room was dark, but something was wrong. He wasn't alone. A shape stood at the foot of the bed. For one horrible, stretched-out second, he thought it was Lily, but then his eyes adjusted to the darkness, and he realized it wasn't. It was her. Emily. Her figure pulsed, glitching like a broken TV screen, her face half shadowed, half smiling. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. This wasn't a dream. She was here. His entire body went rigid with fear. Emily tilted her head. "You still wear the ring," she whispered. Daniel's stomach dropped. His hand flew to his finger, his wedding ring, the ring Lily had given him. Emily's smile widened. "You shouldn't have moved on." And then, she lunged. Daniel woke up screaming. Lily shot up beside him, her hands grabbing his shoulders. "Daniel, what the hell?" His breath was ragged, uneven. His hands trembled violently. It had felt so real. But as he looked around, the room was normal. No shadows, no Emily, just Lily staring at him with wide, worried eyes. "Jesus, you're shaking," she whispered. "What happened?" Daniel swallowed hard. He couldn't tell her, not without sounding insane. So he just muttered, "Nightmare." Lily sighed and rubbed his back. "Come on, let's get some water." She slipped out of bed, heading toward the kitchen. Daniel sat there trying to calm the pounding of his heart. Then, from the darkness, a faint, almost playful whisper. "You shouldn't have moved on." His blood ran cold. The voice hadn't come from his head. It had come from the closet. Daniel didn't sleep the rest of the night. Every creak of the apartment, every shadow in the corners sent ice through his veins. Emily was here, not in his dreams, not in his mind. Here, he had seen her, and worse, she had seen him. By morning, Daniel was a wreck. Lily frowned as she set a cup of coffee in front of him. "You look awful." Daniel rubbed his temples. "Thanks." She sat across from him, watching him carefully. "Is this about work? Or something else?" Her voice was hesitant, like she already knew something was off. Daniel hesitated. How could he tell her the truth? That Emily, his dead fiancée, was haunting him. That he had seen her standing at their bed, whispering things no one else could hear. That last night, when he had finally worked up the courage to open the closet door, he had found nothing. Just darkness. Empty. Silent. Like she had never been there at all. And yet, he felt her. Lily reached for his hand, snapping him back to the present. "Hey, whatever it is, you can talk to me." Daniel forced a weak smile. "I'm fine," he lied. He wasn't fine. By the time he got to work, the paranoia had settled deep in his chest. His office felt smaller than usual, the air thick. At one point, he caught movement in the reflection of his monitor, a figure standing behind him. His breath hitched. He turned. Nothing. Just his empty office, his hands clenched into fists. He was losing it, but then his phone buzzed. A text. "Unknown number. Did you tell her about me?" Daniel's stomach dropped. His fingers trembled as he typed back. "Who is this?" A pause, then, "You know." His throat tightened. He stared at the message, his pulse hammering. He wanted to delete it, to pretend none of this was happening. But before he could, another message came through. "You let me die." That night, Daniel sat in the dark living room, staring at his phone, unable to move. Lily was asleep in the bedroom. He should be in there with her. But something kept him frozen. A presence in the apartment. Unseen. Waiting. Then, his phone screen flickered. A new text. No number. Just one word. "Look." The TV screen glitched. Static buzzed through the speakers. Daniel's breath caught in his throat as the image sharpened. Security footage. The hallway outside their apartment. The timestamp read 3:33 a.m. And then, a figure appeared. Emily, standing outside their door. Perfectly still. Watching. Daniel's vision blurred. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't his imagination. She was real. And she wasn't leaving. Not until she got what she wanted. Daniel hadn't left the apartment in 2 days. He barely ate. He barely slept. Because every time he closed his eyes, Emily was there. Not just in his dreams, but in the shadows, the reflections, the spaces where no one should be. And every night, at exactly 3:33 a.m., his phone would buzz with the same message. "You let me die." Lily had started noticing. "Daniel," she said softly, "you're scaring me." He flinched. "I'm fine." "You're not." She crouched beside him, her hands resting on his knees. "You barely talk to me anymore. You won't sleep. You..." She hesitated. "You're acting like someone's after you." Daniel swallowed hard. Because she was right. But how could he tell her that the someone was Emily? That she had come back? That she wanted him? That she wasn't human anymore? Lily sighed, pressing a kiss to his knuckles. "I love you. Please, whatever this is, talk to me." Daniel forced himself to nod. But he didn't speak, because it was already too late. Emily was closer than ever. That night, Daniel sat alone in the living room, watching the clock. 3:31 a.m. It was coming. His hands trembled as he reached for his phone. He didn't want to see it, didn't want to read the message again. But this time, it wasn't a text, it was a video. Daniel's heart lurched. He hesitated, then pressed play. The screen flickered. And then, a hotel room. The one from his dreams. His wedding night. The camera was unsteady, like it had been recorded from someone's hands. Then, a voice. Daniel's voice. "Emily, stop. Just listen to me." Daniel froze. This wasn't a dream. This was real. This was the last night of her life. The camera turned. Emily, in her wedding dress, stood near the window, her face pale, her expression unreadable. "You don't love me anymore," she whispered. "That's not true," Daniel's voice said. "Then why are you leaving?" Daniel's stomach twisted. He remembered now. He had tried to call off the wedding. He had tried to walk away. Emily had begged him to stay. And then, a gunshot. The camera tilted sharply, the image blurring. Emily collapsed. Daniel's breath hitched. The video ended. The screen went black. And then, a new message. "Now you remember." Daniel's lungs locked. He staggered up from the couch, his hands trembling. "No," he whispered. This wasn't right. Emily hadn't killed herself. Someone else had been there. Someone else had... Thump. Daniel whirled toward the hallway. The bedroom door was open. Darkness seeped from inside. And then... a figure stepped out. Emily, dressed in white. The same wedding dress from the video, only now it was soaked in blood. Daniel's pulse roared. His body refused to move. Emily tilted her head, smiling softly. "You left me at the altar," she whispered. Her voice wasn't human anymore. Daniel's stomach twisted. "Emily." She took a step closer. "Now it's your turn." The lights flickered. The air grew thick, heavy, like the whole apartment was sinking into something unnatural. And then, Emily vanished. The only thing left was a whisper in the dark. "Till death do us part." Daniel hadn't left the apartment in days. Lily had started to notice. She watched him with worried eyes, her fingers brushing over his shoulder, her voice gentle. "Babe, talk to me." But he couldn't. Because how do you tell the woman you love that your dead fiancé is haunting you? That she's not just a ghost? That she's inside you? It started subtly. Daniel would say something and hear his voice change, just slightly. He would look in the mirror and his reflection wouldn't move right. One night Lily had kissed him, soft, loving, and he had pulled away, disgusted. She had frowned. "What's wrong?" And for one horrifying second, Daniel almost said, "You're not her." That night, Daniel dreamed of Emily again. But this time it wasn't the hotel room. It was a church, a wedding, their wedding. Daniel stood at the altar, dressed in a black suit. The guests were faceless, their whispers distorted, like a tape playing backward. Then the church doors creaked open. Emily entered wearing her wedding dress. The same one, the same bloodstains. Daniel's chest tightened. She walked down the aisle, her feet bare, her lips curling into a soft, knowing smile. When she reached him, she whispered, "Say your vows." Daniel tried to speak, tried to run, but he was frozen in place. Emily reached for his hands. Her fingers were cold, wet, like they had just been pulled from the grave. "I do," she whispered. And then she kissed him. And Daniel's body stopped being his own. He woke up gasping. His chest felt wrong, like something was sitting inside it, crawling under his skin. He staggered into the bathroom, gripping the sink. His hands weren't shaking anymore. His heartbeat was slow. Too slow. And when he looked up at the mirror, his reflection smiled at him. But Daniel wasn't smiling. The smile didn't belong to him. It belonged to Emily. His throat locked. The reflection tilted its head, whispering with his own voice. Finally, Lily found him the next morning standing in the living room. The lights were off, the curtains drawn shut. He was just standing there, unmoving. Lily's breath hitched. "Daniel?" He turned slowly, and when she saw his eyes, she staggered back. They were wrong. Something was inside them, watching. Lily's pulse spiked. "Daniel," she whispered again. But the thing wearing his skin just smiled. And Lily realized it wasn't him anymore. Lily knew something was wrong. Daniel wasn't acting like himself. At first, it was small things. The way he moved, the way he spoke. His voice had a strange lilt, like it wasn't entirely his own. Then, it got worse. She would wake up in the middle of the night to find him standing in the dark, staring at the window, not blinking. She would whisper his name, and for the longest time, he wouldn't respond. Then, slowly, he would turn his head, his eyes filled with something that was not Daniel. Something older, colder, something hungry. One evening, Lily came home to find all the lights off. A faint glow flickered from the living room. Her heart pounded as she stepped inside. The TV was playing a video, a grainy, distorted wedding recording. Her breath hitched. The bride on the screen was Emily, wearing her wedding dress, and the groom, Daniel. But this wasn't their wedding. This was a wedding that never happened. A wedding that was never supposed to happen. Lily felt her hands tremble as she turned to call for him. But Daniel was already standing behind her. His eyes were empty. And in his hand, a veil. Lily's stomach twisted. "Daniel," he smiled. But it wasn't his smile. "It's time," he whispered. Lily tried to run. But the moment she turned, the room shifted. The walls stretched, warped. The apartment wasn't an apartment anymore. It was a church. Candles flickered on long wooden pews, their flames unmoving. The air smelled of decay and roses. And at the end of the aisle, Emily stood waiting, her wedding dress draped in shadows, her veil covering most of her face. But through the lace, Lily could see her smile, a smile that had waited too long. Lily's breath came in ragged gasps. "This isn't real," she whispered. Emily tilted her head. "Oh, it is." Daniel stepped beside Lily, taking her hand. His fingers were cold, too cold. "You're not supposed to be here," Emily murmured. Lily's pulse spiked. Daniel turned to her. "I'm sorry," he said softly. Then he kissed her forehead and shoved her backward. Lily screamed as she fell into the void. Darkness swallowed her whole. The last thing she heard, Emily's voice whispering through the veil, "Finally, my love." Lily hit the ground hard. The impact ripped the breath from her lungs, the cold floor pressing against her skin. She gasped, blinking up at the impossible ceiling. A church. No, not a real church. The walls were shifting, warping like something alive, like the whole place was breathing. The air smelled of roses and rot. And at the altar, Daniel stood, frozen in place. Dressed in a black suit, his hands limp at his sides, his eyes hollow. And beside him, wearing a veil stained with blood, Emily, waiting for the wedding that never happened. Lily's chest ached as she tried to crawl backward. No, this isn't real. Emily's voice cut through the air like silk. You took him from me. Lily's blood ran cold. Emily stepped forward, the hem of her dress dragging across the floor, leaving dark stains behind. But I won't let you have him. Lily tried to scream, but the sound wouldn't come. The walls stretched, the pews lining the aisle suddenly filled with figures, shadowed, faceless guests, all waiting, all watching, as Emily turned back toward Daniel, lifting her veil. Say your vows. Daniel's lips moved, but it wasn't him. It was her voice speaking through him. I do. Lily shook violently, her hands slamming against the floor. She had to wake up. She had to break this. But Emily turned to her. There's only one way out. Her hand lifted. A knife appeared in Daniel's palm. Lily's stomach dropped. She tried to move, but her body wouldn't respond. Daniel's grip tightened on the blade. His eyes locked onto hers. No hesitation, no emotion, just Emily's will. He stepped forward. And then, Lily screamed his name, not in fear, not in pleading, but in love. Daniel, please, for a split second, just 1 second. His body hesitated. His fingers shook. His grip weakened. Lily saw the flicker of something in his eyes. The real him. Emily's expression twisted. No, she whispered. Lily grabbed his hand. You don't belong to her anymore. Daniel's entire body trembled. The church shuddered, the air cracking apart. Emily let out a scream, a horrible, inhuman wail. The shadows collapsed inward, swallowing the walls, the pews, the faceless guests. And Emily began to unravel. Her form shattered, her veil turning to dust, her eyes burning with rage and grief. She reached for Daniel, her voice breaking. Daniel, don't, please. But then, she was gone. The world imploded, and Daniel collapsed. Lily woke up gasping. The apartment was silent. The church was gone. The nightmare was over. She turned her head. Daniel lay beside her, unmoving. Cold, her heart shattered. Daniel? She pressed her hand to his chest. No heartbeat, no breath. Tears blurred her vision. Number, not like this. Not again. But then, his lips parted, his body jerked with a sharp inhale, and Daniel opened his eyes. Lily let out a sob, pressing her forehead to his. Oh my God, you're alive. His fingers curled weakly around hers. For a long moment, he just breathed. Then, he whispered, hoarse and trembling. She's gone. Lily held him tighter. She didn't need to ask. She already knew. Emily was finally gone. Epilogue. Months later, Daniel and Lily packed their things and left the city. They never spoke about Emily again. But sometimes, in the quiet hours of the night, Lily would wake up to Daniel's fingers gripping his wedding ring too tightly. And when he looked at her, for just a split second, she swore she saw a flicker of someone else looking back. But she never said a word, because some things were better left forgotten.